Inside CECOT, El Salvador's most secure mega prison in the world. Smash that subscribe button before the walls close in, drop a like if you dare, and leave your thoughts below. Because once we step into the belly of CECOT, there's no way back. Night had fallen over El Salvador, but the prison never slept. From the air, the sprawling structure looked like a giant concrete fortress planted in the middle of nowhere. CECOT, the Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, wasn't just a prison. It was a symbol, a statement to the world that the government would bend crime into submission no matter the cost. But inside those walls, a different truth simmered. The story began with a body, sprawled in the middle of a dark access tunnel leading into the underground control wing of the facility. Guards weren't supposed to die inside CECOT. The entire point of the mega prison was airtight control. Yet Officer Miguel Ortega's lifeless body proved otherwise. His neck bore bruises from strangulation. His uniform soaked in a pool of blood that had no business being in a place designed to be escape-proof. The official report would later claim Ortega's death was an isolated incident, a tragic altercation gone wrong. But the people who worked the night shift knew better. They whispered among themselves that Ortega had been carrying something important, and now it was missing. CECOT was built to house the country's most dangerous men: killers, gang leaders, drug traffickers, extortionists. Many belonged to the feared MS-13 and Barrio 18 gangs that had once held El Salvador hostage with violence. For decades, the country was plagued with a murder rate among the highest in the world. The prison was the government's answer, an unshakable cage. But Ortega's death planted a seed of doubt. Investigators were called in from San Salvador. At the forefront was Inspector Daniela Ramos, a sharp-eyed, relentless detective known for her ability to pull confessions out of men who swore they'd never talk. She was joined by her partner, Captain Luis Herrera, a former military strategist who had seen the war against the gangs from the streets to the barracks. When they arrived at the tunnel where Ortega had been found, the air reeked of copper and bleach. Guards had tried to clean the mess, but the concrete still carried faint outlines of blood. Daniela crouched near the spot. He was strangled first. The blood came after, she said, tracing her finger near the faint marks. This wasn't an inmate. Too clean. Too precise. Herrera frowned. So who? That was the first question. But the second one came fast. What had Ortega been carrying that was worth killing for? The warden insisted Ortega had been delivering maintenance reports. But Daniela found that hard to believe. Ortega's shift log was missing. His access card had been swiped at multiple restricted areas that night, areas unrelated to his assignment. Someone inside the prison wanted Ortega dead. And the killer wasn't sloppy. Whoever did it had access, timing, and purpose. As Daniela and Herrera dug deeper, rumors spread across the blocks. Inmates in CECOT weren't supposed to talk. They were stripped of communication, contact, and even light most of the day. Yet somehow word leaked. Ortega had been carrying a list of names. The suggestion was enough to rattle the corridors of the prison. 2 days later, the first clue surfaced. A scrap of paper tucked beneath Ortega's bunk at the officers' barracks. Half-burnt, water-stained, but legible enough. On it were 3 names. Each name belonged to a high-ranking MS-13 member. Men locked deep inside CECOT's heart. Daniela stared at the paper, her mind racing. Why would Ortega have this? Herrera leaned back in his chair. If it's real, it means someone on the inside was compiling a hit list. Or maybe, flipping them. Turning gang leaders into informants was the kind of move that could topple power structures outside and inside the prison. But it was also a death sentence to anyone caught in the crossfire. If Ortega had been part of such an operation, then his murder wasn't just a random act. It was a warning. Daniela ordered discreet interviews with the 3 men on the list. The first, Carlos El Viejo Mendoza, refused to speak. His silence was expected. He had ruled sections of San Salvador like a king before his capture. But the second, Ernesto Flaco Rivera, leaned forward when Daniela mentioned Ortega's name. His eyes, cold and calculating, studied her. "You think we killed your guard?" he said in a low voice. "Lady, if we wanted him dead, we wouldn't leave a mess." That was a message. To us. A message from who? Daniela pressed. Rivera smirked, flashing gold teeth. From the people who run this place. You think the gangs still control El Salvador? Open your eyes. The government learned from us. They make lists now too. His words echoed long after Daniela left the cell. If he was telling the truth, Ortega's death wasn't about gangs at all. It was about something darker. Power plays hidden beneath the guise of order. The prison itself became a character in the story, its walls whispering secrets. Built with towering steel gates, underground command centers, and surveillance that never blinked, CECOT was designed to crush rebellion before it began. But Daniela noticed the irony. The tighter the grip, the deeper the shadows. Security footage from Ortega's last movements only deepened the mystery. At 11:42 p.m., his access card pinged in a restricted archive room. At 11:58, the camera feed in the corridor outside went dark for exactly 7 minutes. When it returned, Ortega was gone. 30 minutes later, his body was found. A blackout that precise wasn't a coincidence. Someone inside the system had engineered it. By the end of the first week, tension inside the prison reached a breaking point. Whispers of betrayal swirled among inmates, guards grew restless, and Daniela felt the walls pressing in. At night, she studied Ortega's case file, searching for the missing thread. Then came the discovery that turned the investigation upside down. One of Ortega's personal storage lockers, sealed after his death, contained a single flash drive. At first glance it seemed ordinary. But when technicians cracked it open, they found hundreds of files. Surveillance clips. Internal reports. Confidential documents not meant for the eyes of a mid-level guard. And among them, one folder marked CECOT 23, Shadow Directive. Daniela opened it with trembling hands. Inside were plans. Not maintenance records, not guard rosters. Plans for something larger, something hidden beneath the prison itself. A second facility. A secret prison inside the prison. The revelation froze Daniela in place. If Ortega had discovered this, it explained everything. His death wasn't about gangs or lists. It was about keeping the existence of this hidden structure buried. Herrera's voice cut through the silence as he read the files over her shoulder. God help us. This isn't a prison. It's a machine. But before they could process what it meant, alarms blared across CECOT. An inmate had been found dead in his cell, one of the 3 names on Ortega's list. His throat slit, his body staged like a warning. Daniela rushed to the scene, heart pounding. The prison was spiraling, danger rising with every step. But what haunted her most wasn't the corpse on the floor. It was the thought that someone somewhere inside CECOT was pulling the strings. And Ortega had paid with his life for coming too close. When Daniela reached the execution-style corpse, she noticed something clutched in the inmate's hand. A crumpled piece of paper, pressed tight even in death. She pried it open slowly, breath catching in her chest. On it was a single sentence written in hurried ink. Stop digging, or you'll be next. That was when Daniela realized this wasn't just an investigation. It was a countdown. And someone inside CECOT wanted her silence before she uncovered the truth. The night Ortega died, Daniela Ramos thought she had entered the belly of the beast. But the second death, the inmate with his throat cut, proved she was only at the threshold. CECOT wasn't a fortress. It was a labyrinth. A place designed not just to hold men but to erase them. The warning note clutched in the dead inmate's hand kept replaying in her mind. Stop digging, or you'll be next. She wanted to ignore it, bury herself in paperwork, pretend it was a coincidence. But Daniela had spent years staring into the eyes of killers, liars, and broken men. She knew the difference between a bluff and a threat. And this was no bluff. By morning, the prison was boiling. Guards lined the corridors with rifles, tension buzzing like a live wire. Inmates pounded on doors, sensing fear in the air. The warden barked orders, his voice echoing through the PA system, insisting control had not been lost. But Daniela noticed his hands trembling as he adjusted his tie. Herrera leaned against the wall beside her, eyes scanning the chaos. This isn't containment anymore, he muttered. This is a battlefield. She nodded, though her thoughts ran deeper. If Ortega's flash drive was real, if there truly was a hidden structure beneath CECOT, then this wasn't just about murder. It was about control so absolute it required secrecy and blood to maintain. The autopsy of the second victim, Ernesto Flaco Rivera, revealed more questions. His throat had been slit with a blade smuggled past layers of security no inmate should have breached. Yet there were no signs of forced entry, no alerts on the security system. Whoever killed him had walked in and out like a ghost. Daniela examined the crime scene again, searching for what the doctors couldn't find. On the corner of the cell's concrete wall, hidden behind a loose tile, she discovered a tiny black device. A listening bug, military grade, almost invisible to the naked eye. She turned it over in her hand, cold dread creeping through her veins. What the hell is this doing in an isolation cell? Herrera asked. It means someone's monitoring, Daniela whispered. Not just the inmates, us. That night she couldn't sleep. The barracks felt suffocating, cameras blinking red above her door like watchful eyes. She replayed Ortega's last moments, the 7-minute blackout, the list of names, the blood in the tunnel. Every detail pointed toward one truth: someone with authority inside CECOT was orchestrating a silent war. And they were winning. On the third day after Rivera's death, a new development shattered what little order remained. A guard vanished. His name was Alvaro Pena, a rookie barely 3 months into his service. He never returned from his midnight patrol. His radio was found abandoned near Block D, its cord ripped out. No blood, no signs of struggle, just absence, as if the walls had swallowed him whole. The warden dismissed it as desertion. He was weak, he declared in front of the staff. Cowards run when faced with real danger. But Daniela wasn't convinced. Desertion left trails: bank withdrawals, calls to family, attempts at escape. Pena left nothing. His locker was untouched, his phone dead, his family unaware. It was as if he had been erased. Determined, Daniela dug into Pena's assignments. She discovered he had been posted near the restricted archive room on the night of Ortega's murder. His logbook mentioned seeing Ortega enter, but his note ended abruptly. The last word he wrote before his pen stopped mid-stroke was chilling: basement. Daniela pressed the warden for access to the sublevels of CECOT, but he stonewalled her. Those areas are off-limits. Construction wings. Unfinished. Unsafe. Herrera smirked bitterly after they left the office. Unsafe for who? The prisoners, or us? So they decided to break the rules. Late that night, armed only with flashlights and their service pistols, Daniela and Herrera slipped past the guards who dozed at their posts. They descended through maintenance shafts rarely used, following the trail Ortega and Pena had left behind. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew. Concrete gave way to raw steel. Lights flickered, wires exposed like veins. And then they reached it, a sealed blast door, unmarked, guarded by nothing but silence. Daniela pressed her ear against it. Faintly, through the steel, she heard something. Voices. Dozens of them, speaking in low, desperate tones. Herrera's face tightened. This isn't a construction wing. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging in the chill. This is the Shadow Directive. The next morning, they confronted the warden. But before Daniela could open her mouth, he slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, surveillance shots of her, leaving her quarters at night, meeting Herrera in the lower tunnels, standing before the sealed door. Every move captured from angles she hadn't even realized were being watched. You're crossing boundaries, Inspector, the warden said, his tone a blend of menace and formality. CECOT is not your playground. If you continue, I will have you removed from the case. Daniela clenched her fists. Is that a threat? The warden leaned forward, eyes flat as glass. It's a promise. Herrera urged her to pull back, but Daniela refused. Too many had died. Too many had disappeared. The truth was buried in those lower levels, and she wasn't going to stop until she unearthed it. Her chance came sooner than expected. 2 inmates staged a fight in Block C, a brutal brawl that drew every guard in the sector. Amid the chaos, a single prisoner, a wiry man known as El Sombra, the Shadow, slipped a folded note into Daniela's coat as she tried to break up the melee. When she later opened it in private, her pulse quickened. It was a hand-drawn map. A map of CECOT's lower levels. And marked in red ink was a chamber labeled only, La Sala. Daniela's instinct screamed that this was the key, but she also knew it was a trap. Nothing inside CECOT happened by accident. If the map had reached her, it was because someone wanted it to. Still, she couldn't turn away. That night, she and Herrera returned to the tunnels. This time, they followed the map's winding directions. Every corner felt like a knife's edge, every creak a warning. Herrera kept muttering under his breath, "We're being led like rats through a maze." Finally, they reached a narrow corridor lined with heavy steel doors. At the end was a chamber marked with a faded stencil, S23. They pushed it open. Inside, floodlights buzzed to life, blinding them. Rows of metal chairs filled the room, each bolted to the floor. Shackles dangled from the armrests. Recording equipment lined the walls. La Sala, Daniela whispered. It's not a prison cell. It's an interrogation theater. Herrera's jaw tightened. No, this is worse. This is where they break men. As they scanned the room, Daniela's flashlight caught something that froze her blood. On the central chair sat a fresh smear of blood, dark and sticky. And on the floor beneath it, crumpled but unmistakable, lay a piece of fabric, part of a guard's uniform. Stitched into it was a name tag. Pena. The realization hit like a hammer. The missing guard hadn't deserted. He had been taken. And if the blood was fresh, then Pena had been alive, maybe even hours ago. Before Daniela could speak, a voice echoed through the chamber. Cold, mechanical, amplified through hidden speakers. You shouldn't be here. The blast door slammed shut behind them, locking with a metallic roar. Lights cut out, plunging the chamber into darkness. For a moment, only the sound of their breathing filled the void. Then came the hiss of gas seeping through vents, invisible but undeniable. Herrera cursed, pounding on the steel. Daniela's lungs tightened, her vision blurring. Somewhere in the darkness, the voice spoke again. This is what happens to those who dig too deep. Her last conscious thought before collapsing was of Ortega's body in the tunnel, his silent warning. And then blackness. When Daniela Ramos opened her eyes, the world was not the same. The chamber around her was dimly lit, concrete walls dripping with condensation. Chains rattled when she tried to move, her wrists and ankles bound to a chair bolted to the floor. Across from her, Herrera sat slumped, a bruise swelling over his temple, still unconscious. For the first time in her career, Daniela felt true helplessness. Not from the gangs, not from murderers she had interrogated, but from something colder, something sanctioned. The room smelled faintly of chemicals. A camera lens blinked red in the corner, recording every second. And then the speaker crackled. Inspector Ramos, the voice said, steady and sterile. We warned you. Still you dig. Her throat was dry, but she forced herself to answer. Who are you? Silence. Then, we are the architects. The ones who keep this country from falling apart. And you are a liability. Herrera stirred, groaning, before his eyes widened at their restraints. Danny, what the hell is this place? La Sala, she whispered. The interrogation theater. But it's not for inmates. It's for us. The camera lens zoomed in, humming. The voice continued, CECOT is not a prison. It is a tool. You think it houses gangsters and killers, but that is only the surface. Below, we shape information. We turn chaos into control. Daniela's heart pounded. This wasn't just about Ortega or Pena. This was systemic, something built into the marrow of CECOT itself. Ortega found out, she said slowly. Yes, the voice replied. And so did Pena. They were weak. And weakness is eliminated. The lights above flared, and the blast door creaked open. A man entered, tall, dressed in a plain black uniform with no insignia. His face was unremarkable, forgettable even, but his eyes were sharp as blades. He carried a folder in one hand, a pistol in the other. You've stumbled into matters far above your pay grade, he said, placing the folder on the table between them. But we don't have to end this in blood. Work with us and you leave here alive. Daniela spat on the floor. You murdered Ortega, Rivera, Pena. And you think I'll help you? The man didn't flinch. He opened the folder, revealing photographs. Images of street corners in San Salvador. Burned cars. Corpses. Children crying beside chalk outlines. This, he said, his voice cold, was El Salvador before CECOT. Entire neighborhoods controlled by gangs. Murder rates higher than war zones. Do you want to go back to that? Herrera growled, pulling against his chains. This isn't justice. It's tyranny. The man tilted his head. Justice is a fairy tale. Order is real. And order is built with secrets. The next hours blurred into psychological warfare. Questions hurled at them. Threats layered with promises. Daniela refused to break, even as Herrera weakened under the pressure. But in the pauses she began piecing it together. Ortega's flash drive. The shadow directive. La Sala. It wasn't just about controlling inmates, it was about controlling everyone. CECOT wasn't a prison for criminals. It was a prototype for a nation of silence. And they were the latest test subjects. When the interrogator left briefly, Daniela leaned toward Herrera. We can't survive this. Not by resisting. We have to play along. He frowned. What are you saying? Ortega collected files. Pena left a trail. They wanted someone to expose this. If we die here, it ends. If we make them believe we'll cooperate, maybe we get one chance to leak it. Herrera hesitated, then nodded grimly. One chance. When the man returned, Daniela's tone shifted. If order is what you want, I can help. I spent my career studying these gangs, these people. I can give you insight. The man studied her face, searching for cracks. After a long pause, he unlocked her wrist chains, leaving her ankles bound. Prove it. He handed her a file. Inside was a list of names, politicians, judges, journalists, people marked as risks. The implication was clear. This was the real function of CECOT. Silencing threats, not just locking up criminals. Her blood ran cold. Still, she steadied her voice. I'll need access to data. Ortega's files. The surveillance records. If you want me to help, I have to see everything. The man's lips twitched in the faintest smile. Very well. But betray us and you'll join Ortega. For 2 days, Daniela played the part of collaborator. She combed through files under heavy guard, memorizing details, every name, every date. She watched Herrera pretend to falter, feeding the illusion they were breaking. And then came their moment. During a routine transfer between interrogation rooms, the escorting guard turned his back for a second too long. Herrera struck like a soldier, slamming the man into the wall. Daniela grabbed his keys, unlocking her restraints. They had minutes, maybe less, before alarms blared. They ran. The lower levels of CECOT were a maze, but Daniela had memorized the map. They dodged through corridors, slipping past cameras she knew were blind. Gas hissed from vents, doors slammed, voices shouted over radios. At last, they burst into a chamber filled with servers, rows of blinking machines, the beating heart of the Shadow Directive. Ortega's flash drive had only scratched the surface. This was the full archive. Daniela's fingers flew across the terminals, downloading everything onto a portable drive she'd snatched from a desk. Names, orders, surveillance logs. Proof of the machine behind the prison. Herrera stood guard at the door, gun in hand. Hurry, Danny. They're coming. The screen flashed, transfer complete. She yanked the drive free, heart hammering. And then the alarms cut out. Silence. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. The man in black appeared, flanked by armed guards. He stepped forward slowly, almost amused. You think you can steal from us? He asked softly. Daniela raised the drive in her hand. This is everything. If we don't make it out, others will. Kill us and the world knows. The man's smile widened. You underestimate how small your world is. No one will believe you. You'll be dismissed as traitors, conspiracists. And when your bodies disappear, so will your story. He raised his pistol. Herrera lunged. Shots rang out, deafening in the steel chamber. The guards opened fire. Bullets tore into walls, sparks showering. Daniela dropped to the floor, clutching the drive to her chest. When the smoke cleared, Herrera lay bleeding, motionless. The man in black stood unharmed, his pistol still aimed. Daniela's scream tore through the chamber. But before the man could fire again, a blast shook the room. The servers erupted in sparks. Smoke and alarms returned, chaos engulfing the air. Someone had triggered a failsafe. Daniela staggered to her feet, clutching the drive. Through the haze, she saw Herrera's eyes flutter open. He whispered one word, run. And she did. Daniela never remembered how she made it to the surface. Only the blur of hallways, the sting of smoke, the sound of sirens. She emerged into the cold night, collapsing beyond the razor wire, the drive still in her hand. The next morning she was gone. Officially, she had resigned from the force. The government statement was brief. Inspector Ramos has stepped down for personal reasons. Herrera was never mentioned again. Ortega's name faded from reports. Pena's family received a letter claiming he had deserted. CECOT returned to silence. Weeks later, in a dim cafe in Guatemala City, an encrypted file began circulating anonymously among journalists and activists. A file filled with names, directives, recordings. Proof that CECOT was more than a prison, it was a machine of control. The world gasped. Some called it propaganda. Others dismissed it as fake. But for those who knew the truth, the message was clear. The walls of CECOT held more than men. They held the future of a nation. And then, 3 months later, in a barrio outside San Salvador, another body appeared. Strangled. Stage. In his hand was a crumpled piece of paper. Read. The Shadow Directive lives. If you thought this story was dark, you're not ready for what's coming next. Subscribe because the shadows have only just begun to speak.